They were the most beautiful, magnificent, manicured gardens I had ever seen. Huge, I mean, huge gardens full of trees and plants and flowers and the greenest grass that I had ever seen. I've never seen anything like it. It looked kind of like what you might see an English garden look like, an English manicured garden. And then there were all these people waiting for this gentleman to come over. And I found out from my guide that when a person crosses over from a lifetime, especially on Earth, you have what's called a reunion after you have your orientation. And all the people that this man knew who had crossed before him were there waiting for him when he got to the other side. Not just all the people that he knew, but so many people that he already knew from the other side. And all these people were there to greet him. People were laughing, they were hugging him, applauding, telling him what a great job he did. And for whatever reason, when you come to the earth, it's a really big deal to come here because it's so difficult and it's so hard. There are many, many souls who don't want to come to the earth. They instead want to go elsewhere. We'll talk about that too later. So when you finish a lifetime on earth and you survived being here, it's like this huge, huge thing to actually accomplish.
Okay, today to say that I'm excited would be a complete understatement because I have, out of the 1,500 plus near-death experiences that I have read, watched, listened to, and the 80 plus interviews that I have done so far, John Davis's near-death experience story is one of the most complete NDEs that I have ever heard. And there are two things I really love about John, and I'm not discounting anybody else who does this, but John doesn't do anything with this from a monetary standpoint. He doesn't have a book, he doesn't have a website, and he absolutely loves to tell this story. And he would tell this story if there was only one person involved to listen. The other thing is that most people who have a near death experience develop some kind of gift or gifts after they come back. They become more psychic, things change. What John believes his special gift is was the complete memory that he was allowed to bring back of this experience. So, John, I am so excited to talk to you today. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Lori, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. I am so excited to share my story, and I hope that my story can help your listeners and give people courage and give them hope for the future.
Okay,
So
well,
thank you so much.
that's my goal too. I love it. I love it. We're so aligned. I know this is going to be an amazing conversation. So, why don't you start with talking a little bit about what your life was like before this happened? I know you had a early 20s or 19, something around there, but what were you? What were you? Who was John before this happened?
It was my story happened in 1987, and I'm so glad that you mentioned about the memory part because people have asked me for so long, did you come back with any kind of gifts or abilities? Because a lot of NDEers say they come back with the ability to do these different things that they didn't have the ability before. But I didn't have any of that. The only thing that I really had was 100% recall. Like even today, I remember everything that I saw, everything people told me, just like it happened yesterday. So that's why I'm able to share my story, and I love to share it because I can. It makes it come alive more because I have such a good memory, and I think that was something that God gave me as kind of the condition to share my story. So yeah, it was 1987. I was 21, and I was really trying to figure out what my life was going to be all about. Really had no idea what I was supposed to be doing because I was only 21. But the one thing that had an impact on me was I was raised very Catholic. My dad had been a staunch Catholic his whole life. And I remember when we were little, we used to go to church 2 or 3 times a week, and then also on Sundays. So we were always, always in church. And I think that the biggest impact for me from my near death experience was that there really is no one way to God. In fact, it's more like whatever religion brings you closer to God is the right one for you, because that's all God wants is just to come back to Him. And I think religion was invented by humankind, not by God. So that was probably the biggest thing that I learned was that religion doesn't have all the answers. I think a lot of religions have pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. I just don't think any one has all the answers. So when I had my NDE, everything in my life changed after that. It became so much more spiritual as opposed to a life of just religion. Ironically,
Yeah.
though, when I was in college, I took a bunch of different religious classes, religion, because I was so interested in it. I really enjoy studying religion. I just find it so fascinating.
Wow, that's incredible. I love that you're saying that because one of the things that I've noticed in talking to so many people who've had near death experiences is that no matter where they started, whether it was a very formal religion or none at all, however they come through it, they all say the same thing. God is all there is. Everybody goes there, and religion isn't necessarily everything that everybody believes, but it's a great place for people to connect with people that they need. It has a very distinct purpose, but almost without exception, people come back completely changed, and they will state if they identify it with anything as being spiritual.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's definitely what I felt. Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah. I
so
felt
why
like
don't you tell us about this near death experience that you had?
sure. Yeah. I'll jump right into it. This
Okay.
is how the whole thing started. My dad had been in sales his whole life, and he won a sales contest. And part of what he won was he got these two mopeds, or what we would call scooters now. And we used to ride these things all over the neighborhood. Well, one day I was out riding around and I had an accident and I slammed into a tree. And the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand and I had to go in for surgery to have them reattached. Well, I was only 21. I had never really spent any time in a hospital. I'd never had surgery before. So I didn't know what to expect. So the day the surgery arrives and my mom drives me down to the hospital, and as they start to give me the anesthesia, I had some kind of a horrific allergic reaction to it, and it stopped my heart. And I was dead for 7 minutes. And during that 7 minute period of Earth time, I had this extraordinary, what I found out later was a near death experience. And what was so weird about that is it felt like I was on the other side for an hour or two because the other side doesn't have time. And a lot of people like to call it heaven. People call it the afterlife. People over there tend to call it the other side. I don't know why that just seems to be what they call it. So I got the shot and I physically died. The next thing that happened is I woke up and I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. It was made of beautiful white polished marble. And for your audience, this is something they can Google. There's a building in the country of Turkey that looks just like the building that I was in. And it's called the Temple of Artemis, Artemis. And it's a beautiful Greek looking building. And it's rectangular and it has marble columns all along the outside. This is what this building looked like. And one thing I want to kind of set the stage a little bit more is you know how a lot of times we hear about near death experiences where the person is in some kind of an accident or they're having surgery and they die and they find themselves floating above their bodies. They're looking down and they can see everything that's happening around them. Then they become aware of this tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel, there's this white light. Well, as they start moving down this tunnel, they're met by somebody, usually somebody that they knew who crossed before them. And that person tells them, hey, it's not your time. You have to go back. And we never knew what happened when somebody went into that light. Well, what happened with my near death experience story, and I don't know how they did this, but they skipped all of that preliminary stuff. And I ended up on the other side of the white light. And I think my experience, my NDE, is just like it's a jigsaw puzzle piece of all of us who've had NDEs who try to take these jigsaw pieces and try to put them together. And I think that's probably one of the most significant parts about my story is my jigsaw puzzle is that I know now what happens on the other side of that white light. They end up in the orientation center. And right about this time, in my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." Well, I had never heard of any of these things before. A spirit guide, I didn't know any of these things were, but we all have spirit guides, and they help us plan our lifetimes before we come into an earth life. And they are with us throughout our entire lifetime. So this building that I was standing in, it was so long that I could not see the end of it. It could have been miles long. And on the left, on the right hand side of where I was standing, there were these beautiful white marble columns, maybe 20 or 30 feet high, and they went all the way down this corridor as far as you could see. In the center of the building where I was standing were these tables, marble tables with marble benches on each side, and they went down as far as they could go, and they lined up with the columns. Well, the most interesting part about this building, oh, and let me say this too before I forget. As this whole process unfolded, my guide, Alan, was telling me everything that I was seeing. He was telling me what I was looking at. He was telling me what this building is for, what everybody does on the other side. So that's why I'm able to share my story with such detail, is because he was telling me everything I was seeing. So on the left-hand side of where I was standing were these, the only thing I can describe them is they were tunnels, and they looked like they had been cut out of solid marble. They were about maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, and they went again all the way down as far as you could see. And when I looked at the tunnels, they were black. It was like looking into space. You couldn't see anything. And in the center where these tables were, there were two people sitting at each one of these tables. And my guide said they are orientation counselors. And what they do, it seems like the other side, everybody has something that they do, not because they have to pay bills or they have to have a job. Everybody seems to do things that they love to do because all of us were created with different interests and different abilities. And on the other side, you tend to do the things that you love to do more than anything else. And these people that were in the center at each one of these tables, my guide said they were orientation counselors. And what they do, their whole job on the other side is to help people remember where they're from. Because when you come into an earth life and you leave the other side, very few of us ever remember where we're from. And right about then, my guide said to me, "Look up at the next tunnel." So I looked at the next tunnel, and there was a man coming through. He was probably in his 80s or 90s, and he had his right hand over his left chest, like he had chest pain. And my guide said he just died from a heart attack. Well, the woman that was sitting on this at this table closest to that tunnel, she stood up, she walked over to him, she took his hands in hers, and she led him back, and they sat down across from each other at this table. And I could see her talking to him. And my guide told me that what they do is they help people remember that they just finished an earth lifetime, they passed, and now they're back on the other side. They're back home again. And the reason that they're there is because, and I don't totally understand the reason why, but we forget where we're from when we come into an earth life. And I think maybe the reason is if we remembered about the other side, where we're actually from, we may not accomplish everything we set out to accomplish when we came into a lifetime. So my guide said, "Watch him." So his back was to me, and I could see this orientation counselor woman talking to him. I could see her mouth moving. And all of a sudden, this gentleman who had died and at an elderly age crossed over, and all of a sudden, he began to change. He changed from an elderly gentleman into a man in his 30s. And it took maybe 25, 30 seconds. And my guide said, everybody on the other side is in their 30s. And I never asked Lori why that's true. And I think the reason I didn't ask more questions is because I didn't know that I had died. My very first thought when I ended up in this beautiful column building, my first thought was, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea the hospital was this large." So during this whole thing that unfolded, I didn't know that I died. I think if it had happened again, I would ask so many more questions. So I didn't ask him, why is everybody in their 30s? And I don't know if it's because Jesus died in his 30s. I have no idea. But everybody seems to be in their 30s. So this man changed. He remembered who he was, and he got his memory back, and he became the person that he is on the other side. So he was done officially with his orientation process. So he stood up and he walked off to the right, and he walked down 3 steps between these marble columns, and he walked into what I call the gardens. I don't know if that's what the other side calls them, but they were the most beautiful, magnificent, manicured gardens I had ever seen. Huge, I mean, huge gardens full of trees and plants and flowers and the greenest grass that I had ever seen. It was, and I've never seen anything like it. It looked what you might see an English garden look like, an English manicured garden. It kind of looked like that, but it was huge. And then there were all these people waiting for this gentleman to come over. And I found out from my guide that when a person crosses over, and you from a lifetime, especially on Earth, you have what's called a reunion after you have your orientation. And all the people that this man knew who had crossed before him were there waiting for him when he got to the other side. Not just all the people that he knew, but so many people that he already knew from the other side. And all these people were there to greet him. People were laughing, they were hugging him, applauding, telling him what a great job he did. And for whatever reason, when you come to the earth, it's a really big deal to come here because it's so difficult and it's so hard. There are many, many souls who don't want to come to the earth. They instead want to go elsewhere. And we'll talk about that too later. So when you finish a lifetime on earth and you survived being here, it's like this huge, huge thing to actually accomplish it. And everybody was there to greet him. And so it seemed like my guide was showing me the actual steps about what happens when a person dies and they finish their lifetime. They go above their bodies, their soul pops up, they go down the tunnel, they go into the white light, they go through orientation, and then they have a reunion. So I think he was trying to show me that this is what the actual steps are that happen when you get back. So the reunion was done, and what happened is my guide took me to all these different places on the other side, and he took me to the outside of these buildings first, and then we went to the inside. And I don't understand the significance of where he took me because it was just a really small area of the other side. Because the other side is like a planet, it's gigantic. But it felt like I was on a college campus. It had that feeling that, you know, how college campuses, they'll have their English building, then they'll have their science building, they'll have their history building, and they're all in the same area. That's kind of what like this experience felt like I was in one specific area. And what's so unique is that all the buildings that he took me to were made of that Greek Greco times kind of Roman kind of architecture, the beautiful white columns and the marble. And I don't know the significance about why, other than the fact that those are just such beautiful architecture that a lot of the places that I saw were made of that white marble. So he takes me to the outside of this first building, and it was a huge, rectangular, gigantic building. And I cannot overemphasize how ginormous these buildings were. We have nothing like that here on Earth. These buildings were just gigantic. And it had columns all along along the perimeter, beautiful white marble tall columns. So he takes me to the inside, and the inside is one of the rooms. He took me to one of the rooms that was a round room, just very circular. And it looked like a movie theater, just round. But there were no movie screens in front. They had movie screens that were hanging down from the top of the ceiling all around me in a big circle. And all of a sudden, all of these screens turned on. like they were watching a movie. And my guide said, "This is the life review." And apparently, everybody, when they come into a lifetime on Earth, when they finish that life, one of the things you do when you get back is you have a life review. And the number one reason for that is you get to see if you accomplished what you set out to accomplish. And what was on these screens, every single one of these screens had a different episode of my life playing. One was of me as a little toddler, one was of me as an adolescent, one was of me in my first day of kindergarten. And every one of these screens had a different age of my life playing. There must have been maybe 15 or 20 of these movie screens that were playing. And I could watch and see every episode of my life. Well, one of the reasons, or I should say, another reason that we have a life review is to show you how your actions affected other people. And one of the things that they showed me was a memory that I totally forgot about. I never even thought about it. But it was the time in elementary school where we had one of our students, his name was Troy, and he had some kind of an illness or a disease where he had to walk with crutches. I don't know if it was MS or was something like that, but he had fallen. And some of us had run over to help him and pick him up. And I never thought anything about that. Well, apparently they showed that to me on one of these video screens because it was a big deal. It was something that I went out of my way completely unselfishly to help this other kid stand up. And it was a big deal to the other side because that's what matters to the other side. It's almost like Earth is so entirely backwards. We think that having things or making a certain amount of money or possessions or how big your house is, that seems to mean something. But on the other side, it is absolutely, totally insignificant. What matters to them is, have you lived your life in kindness? Have you helped others? Have you tried to make someone else's life better? That's what matters. Well, the other thing that's really, I think, is tough about the life review is you also see the times that you hurt other people, especially if you intentionally hurt someone. Part of the life review is for learning because all of us come into a lifetime to learn. That's the number one reason why we come here, is to experience, to learn, to grow, and to develop. And part of this life review process is you can see how your actions impacted somebody else. So if you did something intentionally to hurt another person, you feel what your actions made that person feel. And that's how people learn. And that's what I learned about what was called the life review. The next building he took me to, again, was very similar to that first one. It was a huge rectangular building with columns all on the sides. And he took me to the inside. And this time he took me to one of the rooms that looked just like what we would call today a modern movie theater. It was long and it had a movie screen up in the front. And this was probably one of the hardest parts about my NDE to really kind of comprehend. Because remember how we talked about I was raised Catholic? This was the part that was hard for me because I had never been told this. But my guide took me to this building because he wanted to tell me that we really do have past lifetimes. And he explained to me that your soul has existed for billions of years. All of us have existed for billions of years at the moment of creation. And we have all had many lifetimes. And what I learned is that nobody makes us come into a lifetime. It's totally up to the individual soul, how much they want to learn, how much they want to grow. So he tells me he's going to show me 3 past lifetimes so that I could tell people that you don't only have one life. You can have as many or as few as you want. It's totally up to you. And he wanted me to know that if you had lived a lifetime where you didn't think you got to do what you wanted to do, you didn't accomplish what you wanted to accomplish, you didn't finish this or some other dream that you had, that it doesn't matter. What matters is that you came here in the first place. You've already won. The fact that you just came here to learn and to grow and to put yourself in an imperfect environment, that is enough to say that you were a warrior. You already accomplished. And even if you think you didn't do what you wanted to do, you can come back into another lifetime. It's totally up to the individual. But he wanted me to tell people that the fact that you came here, that is an extraordinary goal. And you did it. And that's what means something to them. So the first lifetime he showed me was the movie comes on, and it was like watching a movie. And I had a shaved head. I was wearing a red robe, and I was in a monastery. And my job in that lifetime was to teach kids about living in a monastery. And I knew just by watching this that this lifetime happened somewhere in Southeast Asia. And then all of a sudden that went blank. Then the next one started, and it was me. I was pushing a wheelbarrow on a cobblestone street. And what was in this wheelbarrow were a bunch of shoes. And my job in that lifetime was I fixed people's shoes. And I had all these shoes in a wheelbarrow, and I was taking them back to everybody's houses. And that lifetime took place somewhere in Eastern Europe. And then that one disappeared. Then the third one came on, and I was standing in a little wooden boat on a lake, and I had fishing nets, and I was tossing these nets into the water. And part of my job in that lifetime was to bring in fish to help feed the community. And those were 3 lifetimes that he showed me. And it was so funny because I remember I had such a hard time believing the concept of past lifetimes that a couple months after my NDE, I went to see a hypnotherapist because I had heard that they can help you to recall past lifetimes. And I am such a skeptical person. I think I'm the most skeptical person I've ever met because I wanted to see if it was real. And sure enough, this woman took me to see 3 different lifetimes than the ones I saw when I was on the other side. So I know that they're real. They absolutely are real. And again, the whole purpose for having a lifetime is to learn. And something that they told me too that I want to tell your audience is that people have asked me a lot, why would somebody come into a lifetime on Earth when they don't have to? And one of the biggest reasons is that on the other side, everything is perfect. It's like being on Earth, but having everything perfect. There's no war, there's no disease, there's no corruption, there's no illness, there's no hunger. None of that stuff exists there. And they say, well, why do we leave that place to come here? Well, one of the reasons is for learning. If you look back at your own life, you see that you learned the most when you went through something that was difficult. And that's why we're here. I think there are really 2 primary reasons why we're here. The first one is we come in to learn. And the second one is to try to help others. 2 major reasons why we're here. So, so he takes me to these past lifetimes, and I see the past lifetimes. The next place he took me to, this one was a little bit different than the other buildings that he showed me. This one was a huge, round, circular building. Again, it was absolutely enormous in how large it was. And it had marble columns all along the outside of it. And there was a big dome on top. And what it looked to me like, have you ever seen in Rome, there's a building called a Pantheon. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
It looks, yeah, it looks kind of like that with the big, huge dome on it. And my guide told me that this is where we go to plan our lifetimes. And I don't know why we go there, but that just seems to be the place that we go with our guide to help us plan our lifetimes. So he showed me the outside, and then he took me to the inside, and he walked me up to a marble table, kind of like an average size of a dinner table, maybe in your house. It was all marble, and there was a single scroll sitting on this table, and it was rolled up, and it looked like Egyptian papyrus paper. It was kind of brown looking. It looked like it was really old. And my guide took me here because he wanted me to tell people that Nobody's lifetime is an accident. Every single lifetime we actually plan ahead of we plan ahead of time. And it's almost like what people do when they have a New Year's or at the end of every year. People will plan a New Year's resolution for themselves, a list of goals. And that's what we do before we come into a lifetime. We plan what country we're going to live in, what language are we going to learn, are we going to have kids, are we going to get married, are we going to go to school, what kind of career are we going to have. All these things go into a lifetime. And my guide wanted me able to tell people that we write down these major goals on these scrolls. So I opened up the scroll and I went to unfold it. And what it looked like, it was full of black letter writing. And what it looked like calligraphy. It looked like the kind of writing where you take those ink pens, you dip it in the ink well, and then you write it out. That's what it looked like. And I knew that this kind of like a blueprint was the blueprint for my lifetime. When I went to try to read it, all of a sudden the scroll folded up and I wasn't able to see what I had written. And the reason was my guide just wanted me to tell people that your life isn't an accident. As random as you think it might be, you really do have specific reasons for being here. And I couldn't read mine because they thought it might interfere with some of the lessons I came here to learn. And right about that time, I looked off to my right, and there was this huge, enormous wall. And it must have been blocks or miles long. And what was on this wall were all of our scrolls. So everybody that had a lifetime during that period when I was on the other side, all of their scrolls are on this wall. And my guide, when I got to this room, this building, my guide had taken the scroll off the wall and put it on the table for me to see. Well, right about then, I looked over to my left, and there was this huge, sprawling window outside this building. And it's the first time that I saw other people. And there was a walkway outside this building, and it was full of people walking back and forth. So wherever my guide took me on the other side, it was full of activity. People were everywhere. And it was, when you go to a city and it's lunchtime and you see everybody walking around back and forth, that's kind of what it looked like. And everybody looks just like we do. So many people have asked me, well, what do we look like on the other side? I thought we were just balls of energy, and that's not what I saw. Everybody looks just like you and I do. Some people are taller, some are shorter, some people have brunette hair, some people have blonde hair. They look just like we do, and they actually have bodies. Remember in the Bible in Genesis, it says we are made in the image and likeness of God. I think God made these bodies so that we can come into lifetimes to learn and to experience and to grow. Because on the other side, those bodies are perfect. They don't age, they don't get diseases, they don't get hurt, they don't have any traumas to them. The bodies on the other side are our true bodies. Whereas the bodies here on earth, these are just like replicas of the reality. It's funny because the other side, when I was there, it felt more real than anything I have ever felt here on earth. And it was so strange because you know how you have that feeling in your solar plexus? You have this feeling for your whole life that something's missing, but you don't know what it is. Well, on the other side, what is so extraordinary is that you can feel God. You can feel the presence of God. And you have this feeling of absolute love, how much God loves each and every one of us on the other side. Whereas here on earth, it feels like you're in a battle and you're in a foxhole without a radio. You feel cut off. And when a person finishes their lifetime and they go back to the other side, you feel how much God loves you. And I think that's that feeling that we miss during our whole lives. So that was an extraordinary feeling. Well, on the other side of this walkway, I saw a lake. And this is when my guide told me that everything on earth is also on the other side. So mountains, oceans, meadows, everything that we love on earth is also on the other side. It's all duplicated there. Well, there was this lake, and to this day, all these years later, I have never seen anything as beautiful as the lake that I saw. It was a round lake, and the water was so still that it looked like glass. And it was so clear that I could see the bottom of the lake. And all around the circumference of this circle were these weeping willow trees, the kind of trees that have their branches that hang over. And all of the branches' leaves were floating in this lake. And it was absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous. And that's the first time that my guide told me that everything about nature here on Earth is also on the other side. So if you love to hike, if you love to fish, if you love to swim, if you love to kayak, you can do all of those things on the other side. And he also told me that everything that you love to do here on Earth, you can also do on the other side. If you like to paint, you can paint or write or go to lectures, take classes, go to music festivals. All those things exist on the other side, just like they do here. Well, the next place he took me to inside the same building, he took me to another area that was this huge room, and it looked like a library, but all the books were the same. And every book, they looked like Encyclopedia Britannicas. They were kind of purplish, and they were all on these bookshelves. So he takes me closer, and the books, every one of these books had gold lettering, but the lettering didn't go across. The lettering went down. And what he was showing me was that every single person at the moment of creation was created with a soulmate. We all have soulmates. And he showed me where all these books are. And my soulmate's name is Nina. And the book was about that soul's lifetimes. Everything about who they were, what they learned, what they grew into, everything about your soulmate is on these books. And something I like to tell people is so many people feel terrible in life if they feel like they haven't met their perfect mate. And a lot of us don't. A lot of us never meet our perfect mates. And I think that's by design. I think that your soulmate can come into a lifetime with you, but I don't think they do very often for the primary reason of learning. One of the things that we learn the most about ourselves and grow through is having relationships. And if your soulmate was in a lifetime with you, you probably wouldn't learn very much because you have a perfect mate. So if you haven't found your perfect mate and you feel horrible about that here on earth, I can tell you with an absolute guarantee that every single person has a soulmate, and they're on the other side and they're with you for all of eternity. So don't give up. Even if your soulmate isn't with you, it doesn't mean you won't have a perfect love, because everybody does. And that was the building that had the dome on top where we do our lifetimes. The next one, I think, is my favorite of all the places he took me to, because I grew up watching the original Star Trek series with Captain Kirk. Do you remember that show?
Yep, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that show. I always loved astronomy. So the building he took me to next was this huge, long building that looked like a stadium, just like you might go see a football game. There were no columns. It wasn't made out of marble. It was made of something else, but it was huge. So he takes me to the inside, and the inside are thousands and thousands of seats, and all the lights were on. It was really bright in this building. And what it was, a planetarium. And I remember as a kid taking field trips to a planetarium. You'd walk in, and the ceiling was a round ceiling, and they could show you pictures of stars, pictures of planets, things like that. Well, that's where he took me to, was to a planetarium. And as I was standing there was a gentleman behind me. And what his job was on the other side is to teach people about astronomy. He loves everything about galaxies, planets, stars, everything that this guy knew about. And he started talking to me, and he said, "Let's begin." And all of a sudden, all the lights went off. It was pitch black. And I sat down at one of these seats. And he said, "When you look at the stars, This is what you see. And what he was referring to was everybody on Earth at our level of development and knowledge. This is what they see when they look at the stars. And he started to show me all the different planets in our solar system. First, it was Earth, then our sun, then Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune and Mars. All of our planets showed up. And then they disappeared. And then he said, when we look at the stars, this is what we see, referring to all the people on the other side with their level of knowledge and development. This is what they see. And all of a sudden, planet after planet started showing up. First, there were dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, and millions of planets showed up on the ceiling. And he said to me, there is far more life in the universe than you can possibly know. And I think there were two reasons why my guide took me to the building. The first one was to tell me that Earth is not the only inhabited planet. And the second reason was that Earth is not the only place where you can have lifetimes. There are virtually millions and millions of other planets that you can have a lifetime on. And something I like to share with audiences to kind of give them an idea of how large this universe really is. As I was listening to or reading an article from this astronomer a couple of years ago, she was trying to talk to us about how large our galaxy, just the Milky Way, really is. And she wanted to give us a comparison. And she told a story that if we had a spaceship that could travel at the speed of light, which is the fastest speed that we know, 186,000 miles a second, if you put that spaceship on the one end of our galaxy at the end, and it flew to the other side of our galaxy, it would take 99,000 years to get to the other end just of our Milky Way galaxy. And she said that they estimate that there are over 100 billion planets just in our galaxy alone. And some time ago, I was reading an article on NASA's website, and NASA had said that they discovered 285,000 separate galaxies to date. And they estimate that there are billions and billions of galaxies in the universe. So can you imagine how many places there are for us to have lifetimes on and to learn and to have and to develop? And I just can't wait. I cannot wait to learn about that, because I tell the story too that when I was in college, I signed up to take an astronomy class, but I had to drop it because I could not keep up with the math. It was just so, because they try to tell you how to calculate the distance from planet to planet or stars to stars, and the math was just outrageous. So I had to drop it, but I still love studying astronomy. So that was the planetarium. The next building he took me to was the largest of all of them. This one was so large, I couldn't see the end of it. The front of it looked like what there's a building in Washington, D.C. It's the Supreme Court building. It has the big triangle up front, and it's the columns in front and all those steps leading up to it. That's what this building looked like. So we go to the inside, and I realized it's a library, and they had these huge wooden bookshelves that went down as far as you could see, all full of different kinds of books. And this is where I saw a whole bunch of people also. People were sitting, studying. Some people were reading. Some people were visiting. It was full of activity. And my guide took me to the left side of this library. And this is another favorite part of mine for my NDE. On the left-hand side of this building, there are these individual study rooms, what we would call modern-day study rooms in a library. They're about the size of an average living room. So he takes me to this one room, and there was a woman that was sitting there, and she had her back to me. She had jet black hair that was straight all the way down to her waist. And she was sitting on a couch with her back to me, and she was watching what we would call today as a flat screen TV. It was maybe 50 or 60 inches mounted on this wall. And my guide said, go look at what she's watching. So I get closer, And I'm thinking that she's watching a movie between Native American Indians, Plains tribes on horseback in a battle fighting the United States cavalry on horseback. So I thought she was just watching a movie, but it wasn't. She was watching living history of a battle that had taken place 200 years ago here on Earth. And I remember thinking to myself, I said, how is that possible? We didn't have video recorders back then. I don't think we even had cameras yet. How could this be recorded? And my guide said, everything gets recorded. And it made sense to me because that's how my life review worked. I could see every single aspect of my life in that big theater room. And I don't understand how that's possible. How are our lifetimes recorded? But they are. And we see them when we go back to have our life review. So this woman who was in this room, she was interested in learning about this particular battle on Earth's history. So when we get back to the other side, anything that you want to learn about that you like, for me, when I get back, I want to go and see what it was like for D-Day in World War II when the Allies invaded France. I've always had such a fascination for that time period. So when I go back, I want to go to one of these libraries and watch Living History. And I'm a total history buff. So this is one of my favorite parts about my NDE was the fact that we can go see Living History. So that was, oh, something that people have told me that I'm sure some of your audience may have heard this before, but people have said, do you think it was what's called the Akashic Records? And I had never heard that term before, but apparently on the other side, there's a building called the Akashic Records. That's a library. So that could be where I was. I don't know for sure, but that could be what it was. The next place he took me to was an area on the other side where there was this huge castle, just like a castle you would see in medieval England. It was made of stone. It was perfect. It was like it was just made. Absolutely perfect castle. So he tells me to go to the inside. So I go on the inside, and the first thing I noticed was this huge, sprawling red carpet that was all on the inside. And it made me feel like my very first feeling was that it was a sense of royalty. And you walk in, and on the sides of this castle, these were these huge walls, and they were full of life-size paintings. Well, what they were life-size paintings of the people that had lived in those castles during that time of Earth's history, what we would call medieval Europe. And what these pictures were, these paintings were of people that had lived in the castles during that time period. So if you wanted to see King George or you wanted to see Queen Elizabeth, you could go to this castle, you could look at the paintings, see what they look like, and also see what they wore. Well, the most interesting part about this was that in front of every life-size painting, there was a podium. And on this podium was a book. And the book was about that person's lifetime. Everything that they did in that life, everything that they accomplished, anything that they did. And I think because they had public lifetimes. So what's interesting is that if you wanted to learn about medieval Europe on Earth, you could go to this castle, you could see what the buildings looked like, you could walk in, you could look at what these people, what they looked like in their paintings, what they wore, and you could also look at these books on this podium and go in there and learn about that person's lifetime. Well, right about then, I looked over to my right, and there was this, you know how castles have those round staircases? There was a woman who was walking down this staircase, and she had strawberry blonde hair, just about as long as yours is. And she was wearing a peach colored gown, and she could see me. And she walked up to me and she said, is there anything I can help you find? And Laura, you know what I said to her? The stupidest thing I could ever have said. I said, no thanks, I'm just looking. Like I was in
Like
a
you're
quilting
shopping,
store.
like
Yeah,
you're the shopper and the store
yeah,
the clerk is bothering you and you're like, I don't want to buy
yeah,
anything.
yeah. I'm just looking. I could have asked her anything. I could have said, who are you? Where am I? I thought I was supposed to be having surgery. what's going on? But I didn't do any of that. And my guide said what she does on the other side is she loves to study that particular era of Earth's history. So if you wanted to learn about medieval Europe, not only could you go and see the castle, see what these people looked like, read their books, but you could ask her about what was life like back then because she loves to study that. It was like going to talk to a professor or a teacher. So that was here's the last part of my NDE, and this is the part that has affected me the most throughout my whole lifetime. So my guide takes me to a field, and it was the most beautiful meadow field that I've ever seen. It was full of rolling hills, green grass, and flowers, and it was like a perfect day. There was no wind, the sun was shining. It was absolutely just a beautiful day. And then my guide disappeared. He left. And all of a sudden in front of me, a man appeared, and I could see his hands. He was wearing a white gown or a white robe, and he had a golden sash around his waist, and he had um, gold colored sandals that laced up his calves. And I knew that this was Jesus. I knew that this was the soul that we knew as Jesus here on earth. And when I tried to look at his face, he was so bright. There was so much light coming out of his face that I couldn't see his features. But he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." And the very second he said that, it was like boom. I was right back in the operating room with everybody staring, looking at me. And that was how my NDE ended. And the thing that's so interesting about that is he didn't say it in such a way that he didn't say, "John, when you have time, when you have some time, maybe you can share this story with people just whenever it's convenient for you." He didn't say it like that. He said, "You must tell them there is no death." So ever since then, I have tried to share my story with as many people as I can to give people hope and to let people know that there really is no death, that the people that die before you, it's sad for us, but they're not gone. They're just in a different place. And that when our lifetimes are finished, we all will have that reunion again and we'll be with all of our loved ones. And it's going to be the happiest day of your lifetime. So that's what I've done is just try to share my story as often as I can.
Wow. John, that is the most incredible story. Do you know what my number one most popular video on this channel is?
No.
It's the one I created about signs from our passed away loved ones. And
Oh,
I
really?
believe that the reason that people tune into channels like mine is, aside from the empowerment part of it, is because they understand that they've had a profound loss. They don't know what to do, and they're looking for answers. They're looking for confirmations that our loved ones don't leave us, that they love us, that they don't really die. And so, a near death experience like this, in all of the detail, any one of those parts alone would have been profound. But then to
Oh,
end it with an interaction with Jesus, who, for in the United States where we live, where Christianity is probably the most prevalent religion here, and
yeah.
Jesus is the head figure of that religion. To have him end your near death experience and say, there is no death, is just absolutely incredible and an amazing confirmation for people who are looking for that.
It's so funny you said that because it's so weird for me because I have lived with this for so long. It's like second nature for me. But I have to remember sometimes what it feels like for someone to hear it for the first time. It is pretty crazy. And I always wonder, why did they share that with me? Because I don't have a podcast like you. I don't have anything. Then they must have known that. So I don't know why would they give this to Oprah? Somebody who can share this story. It's just
Because
weird.
you add a level of credibility. So I read a lot of the comments because I've been doing this for so long and I've been following other channels that do what I do. One of the things that happens in the comments is that people, they want to believe it, but again, if they're like you and they're super skeptical, it's really difficult. And so they always default to the same types of comments. And the comments are something along the lines of, well, this person is just selling this book. This person is selling this course. This person is selling something. They want me to believe this and buy into it because it benefits them. So maybe I believe the reason that you were chosen for this is because you took it and you decided, I'm going to be the medical transcriber. I'm going to have that business with my wife. And I don't care about all of the rest of the things. I'm just going to tell the story to whoever wants to listen to it. And that in some way also keeps it pure. And please, I'm not taking away from anybody who does write a book or has a course or does anything with it. There's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes it's a lot easier than repeating these stories over and over again to have a book you can refer people to with even more detail than, because there's probably, if you were to sit and write a book, there's probably a lot more detail that you would include in that than you would in telling a story. You know, books are always better
Yeah,
than the movie, right?
yeah, that's true. Yep, very true. Yeah, that's a really good point. I've never thought about it like that. Yeah, that's a good point.
So I thank you for doing this. I have a bazillion questions for you. Of course, I'm furiously, thinking of all these things I want to ask you, but I want to, before you even get into your near-death experience, because you had this super religious Catholic upbringing where you're going to church multiple times, and that is so prevalent in your life. And I remember the time when you had this. We're only 3 years apart. So that's the year I graduated from high school, 1987. And I remember the world was so much different. People were not having these kinds of conversations. I had
Yeah,
never even heard of a near death experience at this point in my lifetime.
I
So
I didn't either.
neither, right? Neither had you. So who in the world, who is the first person, and how long did it take you before you actually told somebody about this? Because I'm going to guess it was not your dad. And I don't even know if you've ever told him to this point.
No, I never told my dad. I told my mom because she was the one that drove me. And she gave me the only book that had ever come out on anything remotely similar to this was Raymond Moody. Do you remember him? He wrote
Not
it
only
was
do I remember
19,
him, but I can look over on my bookshelf and his Life After Life book is there. And
yes,
I could write a book about my signs for my passed away loved ones. And Dr. Raymond Moody wrote a jacket cover comment for me on my book. So, yes,
that
I'm very familiar
that
with who he is. And for those
yeah, yeah.
watching, he's the father. He coined the term NDE, near death experience. And he wrote that book in, like, I don't know, 1978 or
1975.
75.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what my mom gave me. And I read the whole thing.
So
And it
she
wasn't
oh,
until,
interesting that she was
yeah,
in the same religious household you were, and she had that book. So what did she think when you told her? Because this isn't like something somebody makes up. There's so many details, and this is before you've obviously heard other people's. What did she
yeah.
say?
She's the one that said, I want you to read this book because she had read it before. And she said, I think what you had was a near death experience. So I read the whole book in one day. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, I really did have something extraordinary. Because my first thought was, that had to have been a dream. Because I remember when I woke up and I was laying on that hospital bed, the first thing I said was to the doctor, I said, what just happened? I was hoping he might be able to explain to me everything that I saw, but he had no idea that I had this experience. He was just thinking that, okay, he wants to know if he died, and I said, I actually died. He said, yeah, you were dead for 7 minutes, and that was something that was so interesting also because the other side, they don't have time like we do. It's different for them. Whereas on Earth, you have linear time. You've got this time, you've got this time, you've got to be here at a certain period. And the other side doesn't seem to have that. And what's so interesting too is that when somebody passes over, let's say you lose a husband or a grandparent, somebody dies, they still grieve for us here, but their grief is different because for them, the person that they left is going to be there in 2 or 3 months. But for us, it feels like years and years. So it's different for them in terms of how they grieve. They know that we're going to be back in just a short period of time. So
You
that's the
and
first
I are
question.
we are on the same page. There were so many things you said I wrote down, and I'm just laughing. On my channel, multiple times, I have said that about time on the other side to them. It feels like they just saw us and they're going to see us in 2 weeks, like we're on a
Yeah.
vacation. But to us, it's like, oh, here's another 80 years. And so they never, I don't think, have any feeling of missing us, because I think we're just, when you said that they refer to it as the other side, which is the term I use also, the reason I think that is because it's just a dimensional switch. So it's almost like turning a
Yeah.
coin over. Here's a coin and here's Earth, and you flip it over and you're on the other side, and it's just a different dimension, and that's all it really is. Does that
Yep.
resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when you get back, when your lifetime is finished, when you get back, it's going to feel like you just left. It feels like no time has passed. And that's what people who have been married for years, when one person dies, they're alone for 30 years, then that person passes over also, and they feel like they just left.
Yeah.
It's such a different concept of time over there, and
Yes,
I can't
yes.
explain it.
Well, I love that you started this whole thing out with the orientation, and I have a couple of thoughts on that. And my thought about it is that we are given this, people have called it the veil of forgetfulness. And
Yeah,
it's
I've heard that
very
before.
purposefully, right? It's imposed on us. We put it on. We put it on almost like a cloak. It's almost like that invisibility cloak in Harry Potter. We put it on because if we could remember everything that we were, all that love, the power, the knowledge, all of it, then what would you learn coming here? And
Yeah,
I also love that you said that this was one of the difficult places that people come, because I've also said I believe that there are many souls who will never choose to have an incarnation on the earth because it's too
yeah,
hard. And the reason I think it's too hard isn't necessarily because of what we experience while we're here, because those things can be hard. I think it's more because we are so interconnected with each and every other soul and with source, that when we have to put the veil of forgetfulness on and we forget that we're connected to that, it's too painful, it's too scary, it's too, whatever word you want to use, for a soul to put that on. So we're the daredevil souls, the ones who come here. I feel like we're the daredevil souls. So you want to
yeah,
elaborate a little bit more on that?
yeah, absolutely. In fact, it was so it was such a difficult time for me because I could not understand how was I going to make it when I was only 21 years old. How was I going to make it till I'm going to be elderly, knowing what I knew? Because that feeling that you feel on the other side of that feeling of God, it is the most extraordinary feeling. It's this feeling of absolute safety and joy and peace. And it's so contrary to what we experience here on earth that I had a horrible depression that lasted about 2 months. It got to the point where I thought, how am I going to get out of this lifetime? I just wanted to go back. And then I realized that what Jesus told me, he said, you must tell them there is no death. That kind of gave me the courage to share my story. But it is hard. I talk to people all the time that have gone through things that you just can't imagine someone get living through. I talked to one lady from Eastern Europe who had her two daughters murdered. And she was asking me, was this something that was I being punished by God? And I said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. God would never punish you. God never punishes any of us. He gives us as many lifetimes as we need to learn without a threat of hell or being sent to some kind of fiery lake of damnation for eternity. That's not real. But life on this planet, it's hard. And the only thing that I have found is when it gets so tough that you don't know what to do, you've got to pray, talk to God. He wants to hear from us. He's our Father. And so many times we get so caught up in what we think is important here that we strive to have all of these things and possessions and stuff that none of those things matter. It's like when you die, you're not going to tell God, oh, I made multiple millions of dollars. That's not impressive to them. What's impressive to them is what did you do with it? Did you help people? Did you make a difference in people's lives? And it is really hard because there are so many things that we go through. And it's so funny because on the other side, when you plan a lifetime, you know that you're only going to be back in a certain period of time. You're not going to be there forever. So I think a lot of us tend to take on things that we don't realize are going to be as hard as they really are once we get here. And that's one of the things that I really hope that my message gets to is people that are feeling like they don't want to stay here, that they want to check themselves out. Because I lost a very dear friend to suicide, and I lost one of my cousins to suicide. And I know it's terribly hard for the families who are left behind, but everybody cheers for us. That's why that man in the orientation had all those people waiting for him as part of his reunion, because it is such a hard thing to be here. But you got to stick it out. You got to try to do your best, because everybody roots for. They root for us. And I think if people realized, if they knew how many people really are rooting for us to finish our lives, you would just be shocked.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely amazing but it is
Yeah.
hard. There's no way to get around it. It is hard. Everybody will have their own Mount Everest. We all go through that.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because one of the things that I want people to know is that they are never, ever, ever alone. Not only do you have your spirit guide, but to your point, you have all of these souls. I remember reading about a near-death experience that somebody had posted anonymously on IONS. She was very
Oh yeah,
young. She was like 7 or 8 years old. And IONS is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and it's a
yeah, yeah.
not-for-profit organization. And if you want to, you can become a member, and then you have access to all of these stories that people will a lot of times submit anonymously. And this girl had an experience where she died of an illness when she was, I think, 9 years old. And one
Oh,
of the most extraordinary things that happened in her near death experience is that she got to that reunion that you were talking about. And it wasn't just people that she knew who had already died, like grandparents. It was people who were still alive on this earth were in this reunion. So I think that there's like a higher
oh,
self where we don't have all of our higher self, our oversoul that comes into this incarnation. And there's a portion of it that stays on the other side. We're just blocked from knowing that it's there.
yeah.
And
I've heard that too.
she said that she encountered every single person she had ever crossed in this earth time, meaning if she had paid a toll to somebody going through a toll booth, a cashier at a grocery store, somebody that you passed on the street and that you smiled at. And the reason was because even a smile, ignoring somebody when you pass them by, has a ripple effect. And so every single person that you encounter has an effect or on you or you on them. And everybody was involved. And since we're
Yeah,
souls and we are so powerful on the other side, it's nothing for somebody to be a player in our lifetime. And imagine if you get to the age of 90, how many souls you've encountered in that kind of a
yeah.
lifetime, and how many souls are really rooting for you on the other side. It's just, it's unfathomable to
It is.
understand what it could be.
Yeah, and I know that's true because that's what I saw when I was in that round theater when they do the life review. I know that's true because I saw it.
So let's talk about the life review, because this is actually one of the biggest reasons that I decided on my channel to begin interviewing people who had near death experiences. I'm fascinated by the near death experience no matter what it is, but my true area of interest is in the life review. And the reason is because it has the biggest impact and effect on people who hear it. And also, usually, when somebody has a near death experience and they have a life review, it is the single biggest factor that changes everything they do after they come back.
Yep.
So, you had this life review and you shared your story of the child that you had encountered when you were young who had fallen over that you helped. I'm going to share this because I think that this is like a great way to illuminate the things that on the other side they think are important that we wouldn't necessarily think about it. I remember reading about a near death experience by somebody who had one, and he had a life review, and he saw himself at the age of 7 years old, and they'd stopped at a rest stop. And this must have been many, many years ago. And there was a river behind it. And they were given a bucket and they were asked to go and fill this bucket up with water and bring it back to where they were. And he's 7 and he's struggling with this bucket full of water. And he realizes it's too heavy. He's never going to make it back full. He has to dump some of it out. But instead of just dumping it on the ground, he looks around and notices a tree that he feels like is a little bit struggling, and he takes it to that tree and he dumps that water in the tree. Out of this guy's entire lifetime, which I think might have been like 50 or 60 when he's sharing this life review, that was the number one biggest event that he had participated in his lifetime. And the reason was because it showed such a great expanse of unconditional love. He could
Yeah.
have just so
Yeah.
easily just he really thought about it. He's 7 years old before you even have thoughts of things like that. And it was an absolutely revered moment. So for you, you shared a couple of things. Would you mind sharing a couple more things that you can remember maybe that really made you think later on as you've gone through your life about your life review?
Well, the only part that I saw that made me think about how your life review affects other people is when I helped that boy. His name was Troy, and a friend of mine helped him get up because he had fallen with his crutches. But that's the only thing that they really showed me, that to let me know that nothing is ever hidden. If you think you got away with something, if you think you hurt somebody and get away with it, you don't. All of that is known. All of that will be viewed. Everybody has to go through it, even Hitler. Everybody who has a lifetime on Earth, they have to have the life review. Not everybody is forced to go back to a life. That's totally up to the individual soul. But everybody, it's almost like it's a contractual thing that everybody has to go through the life review. Nobody gets away with it, because just like what you said earlier, that is probably the number one way that we learn, is how our actions affected others. But the
Yeah.
rest of the life review, they were just showing me every screen. It was like a movie was playing. It was like watching a movie. Like when I was in, because one of the screens was showing me in a crib. Another screen was showing me riding a bike with what do they call those, training wheels. Another one showed me my first day of kindergarten, and every single one of these had a different movie playing up to the age that I was, which was age 21. And it was interesting because nothing past age 21 was being shown, because that's the age that I was. I hadn't lived the rest of my life yet. But can you imagine how much life there is to view if you die, like when you're 80 or 90? You have so much of a life review ahead of you. So that's the only thing that I saw that really made me realize that, oh my gosh, it's not just viewing it, you're actually feeling it. You
Right.
feel, yeah, you actually feel like that, like the guy you just mentioned. He probably never thought anything about that water in a
No,
tree.
he didn't. He barely even remembered it, but he not only felt it from his perspective, he got to feel what the tree felt receiving that.
Yeah, yep, exactly. Yeah. And that's
So,
exactly what the life review does.
one of the questions I have for you about this, because I've asked many people who've had these life reviews this question: who was judging you?
Nobody. That's what's fascinating, is I was, because I was raised Catholic, I always thought, okay, someone's going to judge you. This judgment has to be somewhere, or it wouldn't be in the Bible. It's got to be, the Bible has to be real. That's what I was told. But nobody judges you. The only person that comes with you when you do your life review is your guide. The only person that judges you is yourself. Nobody makes you come into a lifetime. It's totally up to the individual.
Yeah.
Nobody judges you and says, okay, that's something you did wrong. You did that wrong. We're going to punish you for this. We're going to punish you for that. None of that happens. You are, and I think it's sometimes I'd almost rather be judged than to feel what it feels like if you hurt somebody. That's the most god awful thing you can ever feel, is what your actions did to somebody else.
Right. And the ripple effect of how it affected the other people connected to that person too, because I've heard
Yeah.
life reviews go on not just for the two interactions, but that person, how it affected that life. I remember a girl talking about she was 5 years old and she told on her brother, and she saw that one incident affected her brother so much that he changed the way he felt about her, but it also changed how he lived his life and made him distrustful of people. And it affected how he was able to accomplish some of the things he had come here to accomplish. And she was like, I didn't even do that with intention, not
Yeah.
necessarily intention because she's 5, but how one interaction can have a ripple effect on somebody's entire experience
Oh,
here.
yeah. We have no idea
We have
how
no
our
idea.
actions can affect others. Yeah.
No idea. I
Yep.
love that. Well, one of the things I want to say is I also have heard people who have had life reviews with some of their soul team, some of their soul family with them. And I remember somebody coming into that room, seeing that their soul family was there and immediately feeling like, oh my gosh, they're going to see everything I did in this lifetime, and feeling that dread, but then also having the review and seeing that nobody judged them but themselves, and we
Yep.
often judge ourselves the harshest.
Absolutely. Who would judge you harder than yourself? You know? So
Right.
yeah, it's totally we're the only ones that judge us because we want to see how did we do? Did we learn what we came here to learn? Because that's really the reason why we're here.
Yes.
The
So
Dalai
you all
Lama. Well,
so
go
you
ahead.
all go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say there's something that I read years ago that I've tried to live my life by, and it's something that the Dalai Lama said. He said, "Our prime purpose in this life is to help others, and if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them." And I think that is probably the number two reason why we're here, to try to help others along your journey, because that's what matters
Yeah.
to the other side.
Yes, I agree. All right, well, let's talk about these soul connections. It's interesting that you saw soulmate. And I've talked a lot about soulmates. I have several videos that I've done about them. And one of the things that I understand is that we have many, many, many soulmates. It's not just that one that completes us. However, when you described what you saw, what that sounded to me more like was what I would call or label a twin flame. And a twin flame, in my understanding, is two parts of the same soul that are divided, and they're a mirror image of each other. And there is nothing closer than that because you are really parts of the whole. Not that we aren't parts of the whole, everything anyway. So, will you explain a little bit about how you understood that? Because you've also had a lot of time to think about this too.
Yeah, I have heard that term before too, but I honestly don't know. At the when I was there on the other side during my NDE, I had never even heard the term soulmate. I didn't even know what it
Hmm.
was. So my
Interesting.
yeah, and I had no idea what that is. And the only thing that I can tell you for sure is that we all have one. It could be a twin flame. Maybe those are interchangeable terms. I don't know. But he took me to this area just to show me that we all have soulmates, that we all have a perfect mate. And I think what he wanted me to share with people is that even if you don't find your soulmate here on earth, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're not able to have relationships. You absolutely can, but that they don't always come into a lifetime with you because that might interfere with your ability to learn. But on the other side, that soulmate is with you for eternity. And I just didn't want people to feel like they've been alone their entire lives, that they always will be. And you won't be. But I just don't know if the soulmate comes into a lifetime with you, or if the twin flame, does that person come into a life with you? And I think they probably can. I just don't know under what circumstances that they would do that. That I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, I've heard lots of different variations on that, but I think that's a great segue to go into planning our lifetime.
Yeah.
So, one of the very first videos I released on my channel is a series that I did of 63 videos called Uncover Your Soul's Purpose, What You Don't Know Is Holding You Back. And the very first video I did is called You Picked Your Parents. So
Oh,
I
really?
do I do believe that we come here with a very specific agenda of what we want to accomplish, whether that's a learning or an experience or a combination of many of those things. And the only way that we can have those types of experiences is to engage with other souls who can help us facilitate the experience. So I
Yeah.
really am of a firm belief that all of these things that happen to us aren't necessarily, they're more for us. Like we've planned them to have a certain experience, and without these, we couldn't refine our soul in a certain way. So you
Yeah.
started to kind of talk about that a little bit. Can you elaborate a
Sure.
little bit more about this? Because this is one of those things that I think releases people from a state of victimhood. And it also allows people to forgive when maybe they haven't been able to, because it seems like it's so much about somebody else. But to understand that maybe it's not, maybe it's something that we set up for ourselves to experience, changes the perspective and gives us the ability to free ourselves from this prison of how we think about things that maybe doesn't serve us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think from one of the things that I learned about my experience is that the other side, when you're there, there's nothing for you to work through. There's nothing that's challenging you because everything is perfect. It's almost like if you had the most perfect Christmas that you've ever had in your life with all your family, friends, children, grandparents, everybody there on Christmas, and it's the most perfect day, and you feel the absolute perfect love. That's close to what it feels like on the other side all the time. They have oceans there and beaches and lakes, and you can go hiking, you can go fishing, you can go to music festivals, all these things. And it's almost like trying to describe to somebody what it's like to ride a bike. On the other side, you never know until you actually ride it, but you never really get to because it's perfect. There's nothing to work through. When you come into Earth and you learn to ride a bike, it's like, wow, now I know what it feels like because I'm experiencing it. That's the main reason why we're here. Everybody has a different reason for coming in. Some people might say, okay, I want to learn what it's like to go through a relationship breakup, or I want to go through what it's like to have a crisis of faith when I'm in my 30s, or we all pick certain things that we want to learn while we come here because nobody wants to waste a lifetime. They come in here for very specific reasons, and everybody can have different reasons as to why. And it's also, it's not, it doesn't have to be a whole bunch of different things. Some people come in just to learn what it's like to be in a relationship. Other people might come in to learn what it's like to be the CEO of a corporation. Somebody else might come in to know what it feels like to work with the homeless. There aren't always a whole bunch of different reasons. A lot of times we come in just for one specific area to work on one specific thing.
Okay, well then,
Does that
what
make
are
sense?
your feelings on, I know you're skeptical, so is this kind of a loaded question for you because there has to be some level of skepticism that probably creeps in even for you after this experience. But what are your thoughts about things happening by accident versus randomness versus free will? Because they kind of all three tie in together. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts about, or what were you shown that you understood about those things?
that's a really good point because I've thought about that a lot before too. When we were created, God gave all of us free will, and if God, of course, wants us to choose the path of light, but there are many who choose to go a different route, the path of darkness, and He gives everybody as many times and many choices as they need to get through a lifetime and to learn. But I don't really know anything more than that, really. I just know that we nobody judges us. We're not judged. We're given as many opportunities to learn as we need. But what? Tell me the last part of your question again.
What are your feelings about
Oh,
accidents
that's right.
versus
That's right.
randomness versus free will?
Right, exactly.
If we're planning
That is
things, right? So I mean, I guess there's one that we could take one road and say, we plan the whole thing. It's all planned. We stick ourselves in the experience. We forget who we are and we just live the experience. There are no accidents. There is no randomness. Everything is just flowing. We're almost just in this river experiencing the path that we set up. But then there could be, we have the free will. So maybe I plan this, but then the free will of this other person and they don't want to do this or they do it this way. And then it causes a chain reaction of things. So, what are your thoughts
sure.
about that?
Yeah, this is what I can tell you. The major life events that we come into to come into learn it in terms of, are we going to have a certain career? Are we who our parents are going to be? What country are we going to live in? What language are we going to learn? All those big things really are set up ahead of time. And if you look at your life, you think, if you look back on it, you think, wow, there does seem to be some kind of order to it. These things did seem to happen, but there are also multitudes of things that we can't plan for. Like, you don't ever really think, okay, when I'm 16 years old, I'm going to go take a vacation to California. That's something that is not necessarily planned out. What is planned out is that at 16, you might take a trip. But in terms of where you go, that's totally up to you. There are a lot of things that aren't planned for, just the major life events. There are all kinds of things that can happen that you can learn from, because you can't plan out every single detail, because your life is intertwined with others. All of our lifetimes are all intertwined, and not every single experience can be chosen ahead of time. There is something I don't really understand, though, that I still don't get, is I know that of all the things that we plan in our lifetime, we also plan for our passing. How are we
Mm,
going to go back? Because everybody has to die.
yeah.
We're not here to be here
Right.
forever. We're
Right.
just here temporarily. We all have to have some means to go back home again. That's how it was set up. What I don't understand is, if you decide that, let's say you turn 40 years old and your life was to, you said, okay, I've learned everything I wanted to learn. I'm going to check out when I'm 40. What I don't understand is, let's say you decide that you're going to have cancer. How does that happen at a certain age? How does that unfold? And that's something I don't understand. I don't get that part. It
Yeah.
wasn't explained to me. It wasn't told to me that at a certain time, cancer is going to show up. I don't know how that happens. So
Yeah.
that that's
I don't either. One of the things, as much as I feel like I've learned on this spiritual journey, I always say every year I feel like I learn more, but then I uncover there's more that I don't know than I do know. That's the only rule I
yeah.
can by, because there are just so many caveats that how could you possibly know it? But I do think that there are certain things, like you were married to your wife and I had a husband that I had kids with. I think that no matter what, my life was set up so that we would meet at a certain place in time to be able to have that. I feel like we do have soul contracts with certain people. And again, maybe that just falls under the category of it's a big thing that we absolutely plan for. And it doesn't matter, even if you stayed in one place your whole life and you lived in one little town on one little farm and you never left it, that person's going to come by if that's the person that you're meant to meet.
Oh,
You can't
yes,
not meet
absolutely.
that person because you wouldn't be able to have that certain experience or have your children who picked you and all those other things.
Oh, yeah, I totally believe that. I know that's true. Yeah, definitely. We meet with people ahead of time. And I've heard the term soul contracts. So I know that you actually plan the person you're going to have a lifetime with, who your spouse is going to be, who your parents are going to be, who your kids are going to be. That's something that you actually chart with that person before you
Right.
come in, that you
Right.
are going to meet that person at a certain age or a certain time. That's
Yes,
true.
for sure. Yes. So, one of the other things that I love that you talked about is the realness of this experience versus the experience we're having here on earth. I too have been on
Yeah.
the other side and I have had that feeling of that love that is ineffable, undescribable with our human words. We just don't have terms to describe it, and we don't have any experiences here that can compare to it. And the realness of how this does feel more like the dream and that
Mhm.
feels like the real. So, do you
Oh,
wanna speak to
absolutely.
that a little bit more?
Yeah, yeah. The first thing that it's this feeling that when you're over there, that you're home, that this is home. This is that place that your whole life you felt that gnawing in the pit of your stomach that there's got to be something more. There has to be something more to this. And that's what it is. It's that feeling that Earth is not home. It's not where we're from. We're only here temporarily. We just come here to learn and to experience. But the other side, that is the place that God created for us for all eternity. And the best way I can think of it is biblical in the story of Genesis, where God, the Garden of Eden, that is kind of like your home. It's a paradise. It's perfect. It's the place that we spend all eternity. But during periods of that, we actually come into lifetimes to learn and to grow. But it is when you're there, you feel like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been missing my entire life. And I think the older you get while you're here on earth, the more you start to miss it. That's
Mm,
something that I learned was that
that makes a
this,
lot of
and it was
sense.
kind of an, yeah,
It's like
it was
being
kind of an
homesick.
instant.
The longer you're gone from your home, the more
Yeah,
homesick you become. Yeah.
exactly. That's exactly it. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. You think there's got to be something more to all of this. I don't know what it is, but there's got to be something more. And that's the first
Mhm.
thing I realized was that the other side, that's our home. That's where we're from. That's where we spend all of eternity. And you just spend these little episodes of life when you come in to learn something that you want to experience and grow
Yeah.
from. But
Yeah.
that this isn't all there is by any means.
No,
And
and I love that you talked about the amount of universes that are being uncovered with our technology because I also believe in that too. So you talked about past lives, and I've had a big fascination. I've had past life regression done myself, and I have, studied a lot about reincarnation. And of course, that didn't jive with my upbringing when what I was
Yep,
taught. And it
yep,
seems
me
like
too.
it's one of still the most difficult things for people to understand that we could possibly have more than one lifetime. So I'm glad that you talked about that because I think it's super important and it's just there's irrefutable fact now. I've had lots of guests. Dr. Eben Alexander came on my show and he talked about some sites that have so much evidential information. It's beyond the statistical significance that, it's
That
even
is
in
random. Yeah,
question. It's just a
yep.
fact.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And it makes sense if you exist for eternity, if you never die, you're gonna wanna put yourself in situations where you can learn and have different experiences. And as much as the other side is how wonderful it is over there, there's nothing that challenges you. There's nothing you have to work through, and it's perfect, and you can still learn over there. You don't have to come into a lifetime. The other side has all kinds of ways to learn. You can go to that library, you can look at history, you can watch history, you can go to a place like that castle, talk to someone who's like that, and there's all kinds of things, all kinds of ways to learn. But
Right.
I think when we were created, I think God hardwired all of us to love to learn. We all like
Mm.
to learn new things, and
Mhm.
learning never ends. It's a continuous process. And I think that's one of the reasons why we decide to come into a lifetime is because you want to learn and continue growing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It makes a lot of sense to me. Plus, I mean, I think we can understand it from any perspective without having a near-death experience or being on the other side. I mean, think about your life. Most people do not just sit in the same place that they were born and live in the same land and never go anywhere. We plan
Yeah.
excursions. We go on a vacation. We want to have these different experiences. And it's no different from a soul level.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I understand it too. We want to have other experiences and learn.
Yeah. So did you mention that you saw the souls when you people were having the reunion? Did you
Mhm.
happen to notice were there any animals on the other side that you saw?
Yes. Yes.
There
All of
were.
yeah,
Okay. Can you talk
all of
about
the
that?
animals. Yeah. And that's something that I think God created for us, these companions that we call animals that we love. You might have cats, dogs, horses, whatever. When they pass, they also make the transition just like we do. And when I was watching that guy in the reunion, there were animals there, dogs and cats, and They were animals that he had in his lifetime. All the animals that you've ever loved, they don't really die either. They just make the transition. And I don't understand how that's possible. If I didn't see it, I wouldn't have believed it. Because when I was on my NDE, and I forget to tell people this because I just forget to tell them, but I saw two of my cats
You
that,
did. I'm glad
yeah,
you're sharing that because you know what? Sometimes people love their animals more than they love other people.
I know. That's true too. Yep, I know. And I had a cat named Boo and a cat named Muffin, and I had them from when I was 6 years old till I was 20. Absolutely loved them to death, and I saw them. I didn't have a chance to, play with them or anything like that. My guide wanted me to see that, yes, your animals, these little creatures that you love, these little companions, God gave them souls also, and they exist on the other side. So when
I
we
love
pass,
it.
not only are we gonna see all the people that we lost, but we're gonna see all of our animals there too, and you never have to lose them again. They'll all
I
be there.
love that. And I think that brings so much comfort to everybody who's watching right now.
I know it did to me. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to get back because 'cause I've got just like all of us, we have dogs or cats or, whatever. They're all gonna be there waiting for us."
Yes. So you also had an interaction with your guide, and your guide was speaking to you and
Yep.
guiding you through, giving you the tour on the other side. I'm curious, do you still connect with your guide since you've been back from your near-death experience?
No. Unfortunately, I don't have any abilities. I haven't had any dreams about him or talked to him, and I think it's because I'm not psychic. I haven't really had anything else happen. In fact, I can tell you this though. 8 years ago, when my wife's dad died, I had something happen, and it's the only thing that has ever happened to me since my near-death experience. I don't have any ability to talk to them. I talk to God all the time, and I talk to my guide all the time, but I can't hear him like I used to when I had my NDE. But when my wife's dad died, 3 days later, he came to me in a dream, and the dream was in a hotel. And what he was trying to show me through the hotel experience was that when you go to a hotel, you're away from home. It's where you come temporarily. And that's what it's like when you leave the other side. You come to Earth and you're here temporarily. So he made the dream in this hotel, and he said to me, "Everything is going to be okay. Everything has a reason. There are no accidents. Give it everything you've got, and please tell my family I'm okay." And I remember that because when it happened, I woke up my wife and I said, "I just saw your dad. I just talked to your dad." And she had me write it all down. So that's how I remember that. But he said, "Give it everything you've got." And that's true. And you're supposed to give it here everything you've got because that's what you take with you. What you take with you is all the love, all the learning, all the knowledge, and the person that you have become by going through all of that. And that's what makes life so extraordinary is it's the hardships that you survive. It's the hardships you go through that make you who you are. And if you look at it like even in your own lifetime, all the hardships you've had, the difficulties, the heartaches, everything that you've been through, when you get to the other end of that, it's like you become so much more for having gone through it.
So John, you saw Jesus and you told us that he was the only person you saw that didn't look like a person, that there was light coming out of him. So you had a lot of time to think about this. You had a religious upbringing that includes Jesus. What is your thought about who Jesus is, what Jesus is?
Absolutely. This is what I can tell you for sure. On the other side, you can feel what comes from other people. You can feel who they are, who they love, how much they love people. You get a sense of their essence. And what I felt from him was absolutely a lack of judgment. There was no judging that came from him at all. And that's not how I was raised. I was raised that, you'll be sent to hell. There's only one religion, there's only one way to follow, and it's only through Jesus. Well, when I was standing in front of him, I got the distinct feeling that he doesn't care what religion you follow. He only cares that whatever you do follow leads you closer to God. And I got the feeling that he knew what it was like to be here on earth and how hard it was, because look what happened to him. He came here to try to make a difference, and they crucified him. So I didn't get the feeling that there was any kind of judgment. There was nobody's holding a finger at anybody that you have to follow this one particular route. The major thing I got from him was that there isn't just one way to God. There's all kinds of ways, and whatever way you follow, whatever you pursue, whatever religion makes the most sense to you, if it leads you to God, then that's the one you should follow. Because on the other side, there is no religion. I didn't get a sense that this person is a Catholic, this person is a Buddhist, this person is a Hindu. It was more of the fact that it's this huge spirituality, and that religion wasn't invented by God. Religion came from humankind.
And that makes so much sense because the things that you're talking about, like feeling from Jesus that there is no judgment and there is no worship, those are human attributes to judge,
Yeah,
to worship that I wouldn't think would be in somebody who was all knowing, all powerful. It makes so much sense what you're saying.
yeah,
Makes a
yeah,
lot more sense to me.
yeah. Because being raised Catholic, I always thought there was going to be a judgment, that there was a hell, that if you don't behave, you're going to be sent to hell.
Right. And
Yeah,
you, I mean, obviously, both of us being on the other side, we both have had that experience of that love. For me, I knew that love feeling. There was no part of anything bad, negative, dark that could even exist there.
exactly. That's what I felt too. Yep. That God has the knowledge of that, but he didn't create that. He didn't create that kind of darkness. That's something that people choose.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad I asked you that. So, do you want to leave us with one final thought?
I would say that the final thought that I would have for my NDE is that you are so much more loved than you could possibly imagine, in that no matter what you do in your life, everybody's trying to do their best. Everyone is trying to do the best that they can. And what makes the other side just absolutely joyous is that you don't give up. You keep fighting, you keep pursuing, you keep learning and developing and growing, because that's what's really important. All the other stuff, all the things that our culture, our society makes you think are important, don't worry about any of those material things. They don't matter. The only thing that matters is that you came here to learn, and that you're here to help other people, and do as much as you can for others, because we're all here. We're all struggling. Everyone's here because they want to learn. And it's the struggle, it's the hardship, that when you get to the other end of it, that's what makes it so much more rewarding. It's almost like the harder the battle, the more sweet the victory.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here. So you never want to give up. You just always give it your best. And I promise that when your time comes and you get to leave this lifetime, you'll be so happy and so proud of yourself that you stuck it through. You did your best and you gave it your best shot. That's what matters.
I love that. John, I want to thank you so much for your tireless effort to tell this story. Thank you so much for everything that you personally are doing to help wake up the collective consciousness, to help people remember that they're loved, that they're not alone, that they don't die, death is not the end, and
Yep.
that people are whole and complete no matter what their experience is right now. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Lori. I so appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And thank you everybody for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.